China is powerful today, but it was once brought to its knees by the world. This is the story of the Opium Wars, China's darkest century with immense suffering and endurance, and the long road toward becoming the world's biggest economy. For thousands of years, China was one of the most advanced civilizations on Earth. It invented paper, printing, gunpowder, and the compass. Its cities were large and wealthy. Its trade routes connected much of Asia. Chinese emperors ruled over a vast population and believed their empire was the natural center of the world. By the early 1800s, China was ruled by the Qing dynasty, and at that time, China was rich and stable. Chinese tea, silk, spices, and porcelain were prized across Europe. Foreign traders depended on China far more than China depended on them. This made Chinese leaders feel superior and secure. But the world outside China was changing rapidly. In Europe, the Industrial Revolution was transforming society. Factories produced goods at massive scale. Steam-powered ships crossed oceans faster than ever. Railroads moved soldiers and supplies quickly. European armies became more powerful each year. China, however, didn't modernize. Its leaders believed tradition was strength and saw no need to change. This belief became a dangerous weakness. Britain faced a growing problem. British people were addicted to Chinese tea, but China refused British products. China only accepted silver in trade, and as silver drained out of Britain, merchants looked for another way to balance trade. But what was it that grew Britain and broke China? They turned to opium. British traders smuggled opium grown in India into China. The drug spread fast. At first, only wealthy people used it. Soon, farmers and soldiers became addicted. Families broke apart. Crime increased. Silver began flowing out of China instead of into it. China was being destroyed from within. In 1839, the Qing government tried to stop the disaster. An official named Lin Zhehu was sent to shut down the opium trade. He confiscated huge amounts of the drug and destroyed it publicly. He warned Britain that poisoning another nation was immoral. Britain then responded with war. The First Opium War revealed how far China had fallen behind. British ships were powered by steam. Their cannons were accurate and deadly. Chinese forces were brave but poorly equipped. Many still relied on swords and spears. China was defeated quickly. In 1842, China was forced to sign an unequal treaty. It paid large amounts of silver. It opened ports to foreign control. It gave Hong Kong to Britain. And even worse, foreign citizens were no longer subject to Chinese law. The humiliation didn't end there. More wars followed. During the Second Opium War, foreign armies marched into Beijing. The Summer Palace was looted and burned. Priceless art and history were destroyed. The burning lasted days and shocked the nation. And what happens when a great nation is most vulnerable? Other powers rush in for the grabs. France expanded in Southeast Asia. Russia seized land in the north. Germany and Japan claimed territory and special rights. China wasn't fully colonized, but it was divided into foreign-controlled zones. Ports and courts were run by outsiders. Chinese people became second-class citizens in their own country. This era became known as the Century of Humiliation. The Qing dynasty tried to reform. Factories were built. Western weapons were bought. Students were sent abroad. But corruption slowed everything. Leaders feared losing power. Progress came too late. By 1900, anger exploded. The Boxer Rebellion began as a violent uprising against foreign influence. The Qing government supported it, hoping to regain control. Instead, 8 foreign nations invaded China together. Beijing was occupied again. China was forced to pay massive reparations. The Qing government lost its legitimacy. The empire that once saw itself as eternal was now drowning. By 1911, the Qing dynasty finally collapsed. After centuries of rule, China's last empire was gone. Many people hoped that this would bring peace and progress. Instead, the country fell into chaos. China became a republic, but it was weak and divided. Powerful warlords took control of different regions. They fought each other for land and money. The central government had little power. Ordinary people suffered the most. Farmers struggled to survive. Cities lacked order. Corruption was everywhere. China, once a great civilization, had become fragile and unstable. Then came another disaster. In 1931, Japan invaded northern China. A few years later, the invasion spread across the country. What followed was one of the most brutal wars in history. Cities were bombed, villages were burned, millions of civilians were killed, families were torn apart. For years, China fought simply to exist. The suffering was unimaginable. But something important happened during this time. For the first time in generations, the Chinese people began to unite. They were no longer divided by only region and class. They were united by shared pain and resistance. The invasion created a strong sense of national identity. China was no longer just a place. It became a cause. When World War II ended in 1945, Japan was defeated, but China was exhausted. The country was poor and deeply scarred. Soon after, civil war resumed between rival political groups. When was all the pain and suffering going to end? In 1949, the Communist Party won. Mao Zedong declared the founding of a new China. His words were simple, but powerful. China would stand on its own 2 feet. The new government placed history at the center of national identity. The century of humiliation became a lesson taught to every generation. Museums and textbooks reminded people of what weakness had cost China. The message was clear: never allow this to happen again. At first, the new government made serious mistakes. Radical policies caused famine and chaos. Millions of people died. The economy suffered badly. China remained poor and isolated from the world. But after Mao's death in 1976, everything changed. A new leader, Deng Xiaoping, believed survival required change. He didn't abandon Communist Party control, but he transformed how the economy worked. China opened itself to the world in a careful way. Private businesses were allowed. Foreign companies were invited to invest. Farmers were given more freedom. Markets were introduced. Factories were built. Trade expanded rapidly. This decision reshaped China's future. Millions of jobs were created. Cities grew faster than ever before. Coastal regions became manufacturing centers. China turned into the world's factory. Everything from clothing to electronics was produced at massive scale. Hundreds of millions of people escaped poverty. China didn't forget its past during this growth. Leaders studied history carefully. They understood that economic weakness had once invited invasion and humiliation. So, economic strength became a form of national defense. Massive investments followed. Highways connected cities. Railways crossed the country. Ports expanded. Power plants fueled industries. Education became a priority. Science and technology received heavy funding. China focused on building skills, not just factories. By the early 2000s, China was no longer trying to play catch-up. It was competing. Today, China is the world's second largest economy. It dominates global manufacturing, building infrastructure faster than any other nation. Its companies trade with nearly every country on Earth. Many global supply chains depend on Chinese production. So, this must have been good luck, right? No. This rise isn't accidental. Chinese leaders believe economic power guarantees security. If the world depends on China's economy, China cannot be easily threatened. Wealth protects sovereignty. Growth protects dignity. This belief shapes China's long-term planning. China thinks in decades, not election cycles. It invests in future industries like technology, renewable energy, transportation, and space exploration. It builds trade networks and infrastructure that link continents together. This is why many experts believe China will eventually become the world's biggest economy. Not because it seeks revenge, but because it fears weakness. The memory of humiliation still guides decisions today. Losing economic power would feel like returning to the 1800s. Growth is survival. China's rise began with collapse. The Opium Wars shattered the old empire, but they also created determination. China fell. China learned. China adapted. And now, China's rising, determined to never be weak again.